You awaken to the smell of jasmine and iron. The air is sweet, heavy with perfume, but underneath it something metallic, something wrong. You hear it then, the faint echo of a scream, swallowed by marble corridors and golden lattices. Somewhere inside the Sultan's palace, beauty and fear share the same breath. Before we begin, take a second to imagine this place, the seat of one of history's greatest empires, alive again before your eyes. If you love uncovering the hidden sides of history, lend a hand to this journey. Like, subscribe, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. It never stops amazing us that this global community, stretching from Istanbul to Buenos Aires, from Karachi to Oslo, comes together to resurrect forgotten stories buried beneath centuries of silence. The year is 1640. Dawn spills across the domes of Topkapi Palace, painting its tiled courtyards in gold. From above, the harem looks like a dream carved from paradise. Fountains murmuring, peacocks pacing beneath orange trees, the faint laughter of concubines echoing through colonnades. But step closer, and that laughter begins to change. Beneath the music of fountains you'll hear whispers, measured, cautious, almost fearful. In this world, every gesture is a language, every glance a calculation. The imperial harem of the Ottoman Empire was no idle pleasure garden. It was an institution, a government within a government, where women's titles, alliances, and rivalries could make or unmake dynasties. The Sultan might sit atop the empire, but inside the gilded walls of his private domain, power wore perfume and silk. And no one wielded it more completely than the Valide Sultan, the Sultan's mother. She was the true architect of the harem's hierarchy, a woman both revered and feared. Venetian ambassador Ottaviano Bon once wrote, "In the shadow of her veil lies the fate of nations." Her seal decided appointments, marriages, and sometimes deaths. When a concubine fell from favor, it wasn't always the Sultan's wrath she feared. It was the quiet nod of the Valide Sultan that could erase her from existence. Within these chambers, women trained like diplomats. They learned languages, politics, music, and seduction as arts of persuasion. To the outside world, they were ornaments. In truth, they were the empire's most dangerous strategists. Letters smuggled by eunuchs crossed oceans, carrying coded messages to foreign courts. One such letter, uncovered in the Venetian archives, was signed simply, "A servant of the Crescent, trapped behind a golden gate." Historians believe it belonged to Humasha Sultan, a concubine who manipulated alliances between Istanbul and Venice during Murad IV's reign. But the cost of ambition was measured in whispers and blood. Within the harem's labyrinth, walls had ears. Servants spied for mistresses, mistresses bribed guards, and guards reported to the palace scribes who documented everything. One misplaced word could mean disgrace. One rumor could mean death. An account from the palace physician, Hassan Chalabi, describes an unsettling custom. Every Friday at dusk, the harem's courtyards would fall silent. The women would kneel before the lattice screens awaiting a verdict. If a name was spoken by the Valide Sultan herself, that woman would never be seen again. Some said she was sent to a convent. Others whispered she was taken to the sea. Still, life inside the harem was not constant terror. It was theater, a pageant of restraint and seduction, of soft voices and sharper minds. Every movement carried meaning. When a concubine adjusted her veil, when she lingered near the Sultan's pavilion, it was politics performed in lace and light. Those who mastered it could rise from slavery to sovereignty. Kosem Sultan, for example, began as a Greek concubine and ended as regent of the empire itself. For decades, she ruled from behind the silk curtains, commanding armies and dethroning sultans with a gesture. Yet even she, perhaps the most powerful woman in Ottoman history, was haunted by the system she once controlled. In her later years, she forbade mirrors in her chambers and ordered her attendants never to speak of death. But death was always listening. When she was finally strangled in 1651 by a silken cord, the same symbol of her power, the palace recorded her passing with a single line: "The moon has set." The harem thrived on paradox. It was both sanctuary and snare, where affection could turn fatal overnight. The Sultan's gaze was a crown and a curse. For every woman he elevated, another vanished without a trace. The eunuchs who guarded the doors carried the secrets of hundreds of vanished souls, but their loyalty was sealed by fear and ritual silence. One former scribe of the imperial household wrote, "No place on earth knows more beauty, nor hides more sorrow." Even the architecture mirrored the hierarchy. Rooms narrowing as one approached the Sultan's quarters, corridors twisting until one no longer knew where the exits lay. Some said it was designed that way on purpose, to remind every woman that the path to freedom was not straight. As night descends over the palace, the marble glows beneath oil lamps, and music drifts through latticed windows. Somewhere, a concubine sings in Persian, her voice trembling on the final note. Outside her door, a guard listens, expressionless, waiting for orders that may or may not come. Above her, the Valid Sultan prays in a private chapel, fingers tracing a string of amber beads, whispering names only she dares remember. Power here does not roar. It whispers. It perfumes the air, hides in silken folds, and smiles as it tightens its grip. And tonight, the walls of Topkapi remember every secret they were built to conceal. The echoes of laughter fade, the lamps dim, and somewhere deep beneath the palace a door closes softly, the kind of sound that means someone's story has just ended. But the question remains. When beauty and terror are woven so tightly together, can anyone inside the palace of silken chains ever truly escape? The Bosphorus glitters under moonlight, quiet and still. Its black waters mirror the palace domes above, but beneath that serene surface lie the empire's most silenced voices. For centuries, the current has carried more than trade ships and royal barges. It has carried secrets. The women who vanished from Topkapi were said to fade into myth, but the river remembers everything. In the archives of the imperial household, the truth begins in ink, a list of names with numbers beside them. No descriptions, no crimes, only a ledger entry marked with a date and a weight. 47 pounds of stone. Always the same number. The executioners wrote it as though balancing an account. But what kind of empire measures its justice in stones and silence? Among the missing was Aishi Hatun, a favorite of Sultan Ibrahim Nasrur's. Court rumors claimed she mocked the Sultan's devotion to his concubine, Humasha, calling her the merchant's daughter. A small insult, whispered behind a jeweled fan. Days later, Aishi's name disappeared from the household register. Her attendants were reassigned. Her chamber emptied and sealed. No one asked where she went, but everyone already knew. That night, the Bosphorus stirred. Ottoman execution was not an outburst of rage, it was ritual. When a woman of rank was condemned, the process began in silence. No drums, no proclamations. 2 eunuchs would appear at her door near dawn, their robes black, their faces unreadable. She would be told to bathe and pray. Then, escorted through the gardens where jasmine grew thick and heavy, she would descend into the lower courtyards that smelled faintly of iron and seawater. There, a leather sack waited. The logs describe the method with chilling precision. The condemned is placed within the sack, mouth bound, seam closed with 7 stitches, weight affixed at the base, 47 pounds. Each stitch was said to represent one of the 7 gates of heaven. Whether that was meant as mercy or mockery, no one knew. Fishermen along the Bosphorus whispered that sometimes at dawn, the palace barges would glide out in total silence. A heavy shape would slide into the water, followed by a single ripple that broke the moon's reflection. By daylight, nothing remained. But on still mornings, when the sea mist clung to the hills, One could almost hear muffled sobs beneath the waves. European envoys recorded such executions with both horror and fascination. Venetian ambassador Lorenzo Bernardo wrote in a private letter, "They drown their women as we sign decrees, efficiently, without spectacle. Their elegance makes it monstrous." Yet not all were drowned. Some met fates the world was never meant to see. Beneath Topkapi, archaeologists in the 1930s discovered a corridor walled with limestone and lined with rusted chains. At its end stood a rust-colored cage, no larger than a man's height. Every bar curved inward, the metal jagged with hooks. The locals called it balak kafesi, the fish cage. Palace scribes once referred to this device in euphemism, the chamber of stillness. The condemned were locked within, forced to stand in the center, surrounded by blades that turned every breath into a test of endurance. The cruel genius of it lay not in death, but in delay. So long as they could hold still, they lived. But human bodies betray themselves. Knees tremble, muscles spasm. Fatigue conquers will. And when it did, the hooks waited patiently. An Italian physician attached to the Ottoman court, Pietro della Valle, recounted a rare moment of intervention. A concubine accused of poisoning another begged for mercy as she was placed inside the cage. "I swear by the prophet I am innocent," she cried, her voice echoing through the stone. The guard's reply was calm, almost kind. "Be still, and God will know." Della Valle wrote that she lasted 9 hours before her body gave way. The guards left her until dawn, her silence joining the others entombed in that subterranean vault. When the physician questioned why such methods were used, a vizier replied, "The Sultan's peace is bought with quiet, and quiet is dear." That word, quiet, defined the empire's cruelty. There were no gallows in Istanbul, no public executions for women of the court. Punishment here was private, almost sacred. The Sultan's justice was like smoke, seen only when it drifted past, never when it burned. The harem, after all, was not just a home, it was a symbol of divine order. To expose its darkness to the public would be to expose the empire's soul. Even centuries later, the palace itself seems complicit in concealment. During restoration work in 1964, workers discovered a section of the harem wall packed with debris and, within it, a single human bone, delicate, feminine. Tests confirmed it belonged to the 17th century. The surrounding plaster bore faint scratches, as if someone had clawed against the stone. The Ottoman chroniclers who survived long enough to reflect on these acts wrote with cautious distance. In his memoirs, the poet Nabi wrote, "The Bosphorus feeds on secrets. Its waves rise and fall like the breathing of ghosts." His words capture what historians still struggle to reconcile, that beneath the empire's refinement, there thrived an industry of silence, perfected through generations. By the mid-17th century, these punishments had become both message and myth. Every new concubine entering the harem knew the story of the drowned, the caged, the vanished. It was part of their education, whispered during evening prayers, "The water remembers." It was how the empire sustained obedience without ever raising its voice. And yet, what terrifies most is not the cruelty itself, but its order, the bureaucracy of fear, the ledgers balanced, the signatures neatly inscribed beside the word "fulfilled." In those inked lines lies the truth of empire, power maintained not through passion, but through the routine efficiency of silence. Tonight, the Bosphorus is calm again, its surface a mirror of stars. But beneath that beauty drifts 1,000 untold stories, their names long washed away. And as the tide laps against the palace walls, it sounds almost like whispering, like someone still trying to speak. Because even water, it seems, forgets nothing. By the dawn of the 19th century, the palace of Topkapi had gone quiet. The courtyard still gleamed with marble. The roses still bloomed in orderly gardens, but the air had changed. The echo of chains, the soft lapping of the Bosphorus that once whispered of death, had been replaced by the measured footsteps of archivists and foreign dignitaries. The empire that once ruled through silence now sought to control something far more enduring: memory. In London, 1827, a letter sealed in red wax crosses a desk in the Foreign Office. The signature at the bottom reads Sir Stratford Canning, His Majesty's Ambassador to the Sublime Porte. The letter's purpose is simple but devastating. Any accounts unfavorable to the decorum of the imperial household should be suppressed or framed within the context of Oriental spectacle. Such material, if left unrefined, risks fueling undue sympathy for the Turk or hostility toward European enterprise. In other words, turn cruelty into color, turn truth into entertainment. The same year in Istanbul, Ottoman historian Ahmed Cevdet Pasha receives a private order from the Grand Vizier's office. The directive demands the removal of unsubstantiated accounts from the imperial annals, particularly those mentioning the punishment of concubines or the internal affairs of the harem. To question the past, it warned, was to disturb the repose of the ancestors. It was the beginning of a quiet partnership, an unspoken pact between two empires. The Ottomans would bury their shame. The Europeans would paint it gold. Soon, the libraries of Europe filled with a new kind of history: lush engravings of odalisques reclining on silk cushions, Venetian painters depicting veiled beauties bathed in candlelight, and travelogues written by men who had never set foot inside the palace. In these pages, the harem was no longer a prison. It was paradise. But beneath the brushstrokes lay another intent. France, Britain, and later the Austro-Hungarian Empire would all use this myth to justify their civilizing missions. The East, they claimed, was decadent and backward, a world of sensuality and cruelty that demanded European intervention. Colonial propaganda was built not on new lies, but on the burial of old ones. In 1851, a French scholar named Henri Fauvel stood inside the Ottoman archives, inspecting manuscripts for translation. His notes reveal the quiet choreography of erasure. Certain volumes, water-damaged, removed by request of palace official. Entries concerning the imperial women's quarters deemed unsuitable for foreign study. The handwriting trembles as if he knew what he was complicit in. Years later, in Paris, he boasted of his findings in a lecture. The Orient's mysteries are better imagined than known. The audience applauded. Meanwhile, in Istanbul, the harem's remains were literally entombed. When Abdülmecid Erdoğan moved the imperial family to the new Dolmabahce Palace, Topkapi became a mausoleum of its own sins. Whole sections of the old harem were sealed behind new walls. Architects plastered over murals depicting women at prayer, burned linens embroidered with initials of forgotten concubines, and buried ledgers beneath marble tiles. The empire's silence became architecture. Yet, paper survives longer than power. In 1910, an Armenian archivist named Levon Artinian discovered a set of water-stained documents inside a broken chest in the basement of the Istanbul University Library. Among them were execution orders signed in elegant calligraphy, names redacted, crimes replaced by euphemisms like breach of modesty and disloyal affection. On one margin, he found a faint note scrawled in pencil, "Better not remembered." He smuggled the papers out, hiding them within a collection of trade permits destined for Marseille. But the world was not ready to listen. Within 5 years, the Ottoman Empire was gone, and Europe had blood of its own to conceal. In the wake of the First World War, history itself became a negotiation. The victors wrote their versions with elegant detachment, turning Ottoman cruelty into Oriental myth and their own atrocities into necessity. Museums displayed harems in miniature, silken dioramas of dancers and fountains, every figure smiling. No mention of sacks, chains, or cages, just perfume and paradise. Was it deliberate? Or did humanity simply prefer beauty to truth? The deeper historians dug, the more they realized how deliberate the forgetting was. British anthropologist Gertrude Bell, in her 1921 letters, confessed her disillusionment. "I begin to suspect that our archives are not repositories of truth, but instruments of comfort. We do not record what happened, only what should have." Even the Ottoman successors followed suit. When Topkapi opened as a museum in 1924, its curators were instructed to emphasize refinement over cruelty. The harem chambers gleamed under new chandeliers, their dark past erased for the sake of national pride and tourism. The women who once ruled and suffered there were rebranded as symbols of elegance. Visitors came by the thousands, breathing the same air that once carried the scent of fear, unaware. But history does not rest easily. In 2009, during a restoration of the palace's lower levels, conservators discovered a hidden door behind a crumbling wall. Inside lay a small chamber filled with charred papers, melted wax seals, and fragments of bone china. Among the ashes was a bronze seal inscribed with a single word, Hafiza, memory. The empire had tried to destroy even the evidence of its forgetting. And so, centuries later, the truth emerges not as revelation, but as accusation. Every culture that claimed superiority used the same tools: beauty, myth, omission. The Ottomans drowned their women in silence. The Europeans drowned them in stories. Both achieved the same result. Outside, the Bosphorus still glitters, as it did centuries before, carrying the reflections of bridges and ferries across its dark waters. Tourists lean over the rails, taking photographs, unaware that beneath them flows the empire's unburied conscience. The river glides on, indifferent, patient, ancient. Because history, like the Bosphorus, never stops moving. It only carries its dead differently.